Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves and today we're talking in the common tongue. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and the man who thinks double denim is one of his 5 a day.
I do like a bit of double denim.
Martin, what do you like? Honest, you are. I'd call you a midlife crisis, but you're long past midlife, mate.
Double denim is okay as long as it's 2 different colours of denim.
You'd still have the two-tone jeans if you could get away with it.
I do, yeah.
But much more importantly, we're delighted to be joined in the tortoise shack by architect, founder of FEASTA, author, and I'd say a bit of a radical voice in some ways. Emer O'Siochrú. Emer, we've had a few ding dongs online, and I'm always willing to say when I'm wrong and when we get it right. And I think sometimes people get too offended or too quick not to, hear other voices. You certainly have different perspectives on some of the housing issues that are facing Ireland at the moment. So that's why I'm delighted that you came over to have a chat with us.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to get these ideas out. It's actually not easy to get a slightly different view out where people are beginning to polarize now into 2 camps. And if you've got number 3 idea, nobody wants to hear it. So I really appreciate this opportunity.
Not at all. And I think we will jump straight in because you've written 2 books. You've written The Fair Tax, and you've contributed to... edited to Fleeing Vesuvius, which is a brilliant book as well. And I've got both of them sitting in front of me here. But on the idea around the commons, and I was actually showing Martin the graphics before, showing how we used to live versus how we do live now, and how, this idea of the Irish one-off house, the bungalow, and how that was actually not our original. You might explain some of that just for our listeners' benefit.
Yes, I mean, people think there's only 2 ways of having property. There's private property and there's public property. But there's actually 3. There's another one called property or commons. Res communa was the Latin name for it. And the Irish, before the invasions, operated a system of commons. And land was held by a clan and was distributed in according to its quality to its members fairly. And of course everybody defended it. You could also have private property, but it was understood that your private property was only possible because the clan was there and you had to pay a contribution for the privilege of having some private property. And of course women had property too. So it was, I can't say it was egalitarian, but it was more so than any other society. And it was all codified very carefully down to whose was what. Even in the Brehon laws, as to, for instance, if you're a beekeeper and the bees are collecting nectar from, the college, etc., and how you'd assign the value of the honey and so on. And contract law was an Irish thing as well. And we contributed a lot of that to the Normans when they came over. And indeed, the Normans assimilated pretty thoroughly in Ireland. So there was elements of common land in that sense, always, until the second invasion, really, and Cromwell. And over time, and then the enclosures and so on and so forth.
And that basically then left us with this disparate, I've shown Martin the graphics, and it's quite striking when you look at the differences of our living habits, as you'd put it, Yes. I'm struck by something else you said about women being able to hold land. There's an interesting thing in Simon Shamma's book about when some of the rabbis arrived into, I think it was Elephantine Egypt, and saw that women had property rights in Judaism, and they went, they're doing this all wrong, and they needed to rewrite some of the Hebrew script to say that this couldn't happen, So it does seem it always boils down to control over property, whether it be females or land. We have this. We're fighting this constant battle for centuries now.
Yes, that's true. But in Ireland, we had a land struggle that was pivotal in our whole march towards independence. And what people forget was that in some ways they think it was a land struggle of the peasant. But in fact, who led the land struggle were the villages and towns that had developed the previous 100 years. And that was the first time the Catholics got interest in land. It wasn't freehold, but it was life and long leases in land, built up capital. And they're the ones, like the abject poor don't run revolutions. It's usually the disappointed, aspiring middle class, or those who've got something behind them. And they combined together and ran a masterful campaign and ended up getting the right to buy, essentially. But it started off as the 3Fs, which was a fairer land rent system. And my hero really is Michael Davitt. And he picked up the ideas of Henry George, and what he wanted essentially, if you read what he said, was that the land would be transferred effectively to the local authorities, and you'd pay half your rent to the local authority. And he wanted that income to be used for education, because he benefited from education when he was in Scotland, and he saw that as, he wasn't just a rural peasant leader. He was also understood the position of the town dweller. So, but that got unfortunately shoved aside, and it became the right to buy, or the right of the head tenant to the land. And that's what happened. There was a redistribution to the head tenant, who was male and firstborn, and everybody else had to emigrate, essentially.
We were only talking recently, and it's that intersectionality between property and education, that it wasn't a singular issue. And we were only talking about this the other day. We were saying that in our society now, all the issues are separate. We have a housing march, we have a hospital trolley march, we have... Whereas these are all really one issue.
I see them as one issue, and I see them as the fact that we were deprived of the natural and social commons, and we have an opportunity now to take them back. Now, this isn't your usual Marxist discourse here, which just really looks at capital and labour. And what we're saying, which I picked up from Henry George and Davitt and others, Marx in his latest works, was that land is a factor of production. It is not a form of capital. It is something in its own right. Land is the great natural commons. And from there flows water. From there flows renewable energy. From there comes the atmosphere. And what I propose is the commoners, which are us, would take our inheritance. You know how in the Bible it says the poor or the meek shall inherit the earth? Well, this is now. We either demand our inheritance or we will have no earth. We have to demand it back. And that, so it's a grand narrative. Like in your last interview, everybody had different ideas. And I was sitting there saying, no, there is a grand narrative. You're not allowed to have a grand narrative. That in postmodern discourse, the idea of a grand narrative was smashed. Nobody could have an overarching idea. Like it was a reaction against communism and socialism. Yeah. So we're all supposed to understand that everybody has an element of the truth, and that there was no essential single story. So you weren't allowed, in a way, develop it. Well, that's crap. The right have a single story, and it's compelling, and they have got hegemony now for their neoliberal economics, essentially. And it is hard to think outside of that framework, because the left and the Greens have paralysed themselves by separating all of the issues and not allowing themselves to say, there is a solution. There is a story, and the story is an old one, and we can address it. We can address both the existential challenge of imminent destruction of the entire civilization of the human race. I mean, the earth will survive, we won't. That's imminent, that's happening. And the other thing is the great problem of inequality that exists. And we can tackle both by taking back our inheritance, which is the commons, the natural commons, and now the social commons, which is information, technology, our own information, etc. That has to be tackled in the same way. The thing about a natural commons is it can be destroyed by overuse. And that's the argument for privatizing it, the tragedy of the commons. harden in others, that if everybody can use a hill and graze their sheep on it and it's commonage, then the hill gets destroyed by all the sheep. So the only way you can manage it is by parceling it up into private property. But of course others have proved, Alstrom, a woman economist, Nobel Prize winner, said no, through history people have learned to manage their commons, and it's only a tragedy really when that breaks down. So we can take back the commons and we can use and learn some of those old skills, and we have new technologies as well. So the great underlying commons is land, and I'm saying is look for that back. Don't look for an abstract right of housing. This is where I've argued with you.
Yeah.
Look for the real thing. The real thing is the land, and get that back into common ownership. And then a lot of other things flow from that.
I've seen, and I think it's important, you use the phrase, the abstract concept of housing, because as we know, I often speak in terms of the human right to adequate housing, and you would argue that that's, as you said, as you do, you argue that's an abstract principle, and I talk about it being the root to human dignity as well. But if you were to say, like, let's be practical about this and pragmatic, so we have the Land Development Agency, which is taking our land and it's giving it to private developers to maybe parcel out and back some of it up to 10% or 30%.
This is the thing. This is the thing that's happening now. The Land Development Agency came out of, I think, in a way, an excellent report, the Urban Development, Land, Housing, Infrastructure report that was brought out by NESC.
It was, that's the NESC report that Ed Brophy quoted back to me, and I know Orla Hegarty had sat in a few of the panels as well.
Yes, yes. But what actually came out of it is as some kind of distorted bastard.
Yeah, NESC didn't recommend what
is actually happening.
I want to be clear. On the podcast, I need to say that the NESC recommendations don't make the recommendations that the Land Development Agency are actually following through with.
Now, we don't know yet fully what they're going to do, even though they hired all their staff and are now appointing their board. But we have a pretty good idea by the hiring of the staff. Number one, what is it, John, what's his name? Colm, I think. Ex-NAMA. This is not who you should hire. So all of what I call the parasitical property development professionals apparently would be catered for. Nobody who does anything productive. No architects, no engineers, no even quantity surveyors, no even builders, who I see as positive contribution, as people who contribute to the economy in very positive ways. But instead it'll be, financial people, accountants, valuers, etc. Project managers at the higher level managing the finance. So it'll be the financialised professionals of the property development sector.
Which is why and again, something we've kind of talked around before, is that basically the property, whether it be commercial or private, is the biggest market or product or commodity in the world now.
Oh, it is, and always has. And at the moment, we're going to look at another crisis within the next couple of years, financial crisis, and the wealthy elite are moving into real assets from their claims on the future. And the advice is to buy apartments, small apartments, to secure your wealth. And the reason is, even though there will be a great devaluation again, at least you have the cash income stream. So Ireland is incredibly attractive to the international financial elite at this moment. And when I see built to rent, my heart drops, because that's been a campaign running for about 5 years from the Urban Land Institute, which I joined. And they're the people who are really writing the policy on housing in Ireland. And they've been looking for housing to rent as the solution, and that somehow or another young people in Ireland, and anybody younger than me as I regard, from X generation down, should not aspire to own a house anymore.
Yes.
And that it should be acceptable. And I'm getting it back from the Green Party. I'm getting it back from other people. They don't know where their framing has changed. It's not acceptable. We should have affordable houses to buy and affordable houses to rent and social supported housing. And all of that is possible if you do one thing. If you separate the land from the building.
Yeah.
And then everything becomes possible.
That's the key point.
Yeah.
If we had a strategy, let's put this into how something like this could work. If you had a strategy whereby, let's say you had the private developers and you said to them, this is state land and it will remain state land. You're going to be allowed to build.
Commons land.
Yes, but you're
Interest. Yes.
And you're going to build on it, and you're going to take your profit from your construction.
Exactly.
But we always own the underlying land.
Yes.
And if you can go on that, is there room there to meet the ideological that we have to keep our developer buddies happy? Is there room there? Because we know that when they gifted land in Ballymun to the O'Coulon Cooperative, they could build it for 160,000.
Okay, but they're building a house for a start, not an apartment, which is much cheaper to build a house. Yeah. The other thing about O'Coulon, and they did great work, by the way, and they did that within 2 years from a standing start. Yeah. It's amazing. But is they didn't go through the procurement system.
No,
they hired an architect they knew they could trust, and they in turn hired builders, and they proceeded quickly. This is something the local authorities cannot do. The procurement system would break your heart. And this is only coming out recently. And we know this as architects. We know that it can take 10 years to be appointed as an architect. But most current, for a particular job at one point, it was actually taking that long. And you hadn't even got to construction. So there is a difficulty there. This is one of the things that's not talked about, really. The difficulties of the procurement process within the public sector.
Now, Orla Hegarty did touch on this with us.
She's beginning to, it's beginning to get discussed. And one of the reasons the local authorities in Dublin didn't move on their 10 sites that they were to look for was that the procurement process was so difficult. And in fact, we were hoping, in a way, to make a proposal. I should tell you who we are. Okay. About nearly 3-4 years ago, having failed in getting a site value tax through, I figured, there we're trying to get other people to do things like the government. We're giving away our agency. But what can we do as professionals, as architects and engineers and so on? And what you can do is you can partly in a bounded area do development as if there is a site value tax. In other words, in a community land trust where the land is put in trust and you will pay a ground rent on it. But you're paying it to yourself essentially as a community. And this is an idea that, it's reinvented every couple of generations, but it's gaining adherence in the UK and in the US and in Canada and in Brussels. It's beginning to build again as one of the preferred solutions. So we brought over experts using the RII, the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland, as a base. They kindly provided the premises, and we had a workshop on what could we learn from the community land trust movement in the UK and the US. And that was really interesting. We did a great turnout. And from that, we met for 3 years discussing essentially how the professionals could contribute and move it along. And we made many submissions to the Oireachtas Committee. We could never get an audience with them, ever. As I say, we don't fit the usual categories. And we of course, we met the Minister Damien English once, really. But I don't think they were listening because civil servants were whispering into his ears the whole time we were there. But
they were whispering through his ears, trust me. There was one whispering in here to the other one out the other side.
He met us.
Trust me.
We weren't able, we never
I've met
got an
him
audience
twice. So I know your experience. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. But we couldn't get anywhere. And again, following my new mantra from 7 years ago to stop doing things that don't succeed, we thought, well, can we further take it into our own hands? What can we do to make it happen? So we thought, okay, the local authority in Dublin City Council have decided they're going to make public land available under PPPs. What if we set up a cooperative of building professionals and others? And the idea is to have a multi stakeholder cooperative or an open cooperative. This is a new idea that's developing in other countries as well, often around community land trusts. And the great idea of doing a multi-stakeholder cooperative is that you're bringing in the building professionals, you're bringing in the builders, the actual productive builders. You're bringing in your local community and your tenants, your people who dwell in a particular area, and you bring in the wider community as well. And the idea is you set it up with three main sectors: productive, the users, and the community. And their interests are balanced. So we can get outside of the public procurement system, which operates with regulation. We can get outside the private system, which operates by competition, cutthroat competition when it comes to professionals.
Yes.
And you're allowed benefit. For instance, you're allowed benefit yourself. You can have right livelihood as an architect because you can do free work. You wouldn't know, and I wouldn't qualify now to get public work because I haven't done work of a large nature 5-story apartments in the last 5 years. That's what you need to do. And it's very difficult to get through procurement. And if you, for instance, do free work for a housing association as an architect to make something happen, or a cooperative to make something happen, you're not allowed to get the subsequent work that has been generated by your free work. It has to be free. It's ridiculous. So in this country, unlike Scandinavian countries where architects led the cooperative housing movement, we're not allowed benefit in any way from our contribution. You can benefit as a tenant, but you can't get work. It's all about conflict of interest.
Yes.
However, when your cooperative includes the productive professionals, the people who are, it's not a problem. Because everybody's in it to benefit themselves. It's self-help across all of the major groupings. And the way you ensure that there's no corruption is that you have representatives watching each other the whole time. And the users are watching the professionals.
And they all have equal agency.
They all have equal agency, yes. And that's where it's resolved. But you can never get rid of risk. This is one of the problems with public procurement. And they're always trying to put the risk of the private sector, but it always lands back on them. So you're far better off accepting risk and managing it not in a very large scale, at a scale you can handle. So that was our idea. We would set up a community land trust, which would be linked, community land cooperative linked to a trust, because the trust would hold the land with the same kind of structure, but the cooperative would be those who do it, make it happen. Because one of the difficulties is getting over the hump. Why hasn't anything happened? For 10 years, nothing has happened. The money is there, the will is there, etc. It hasn't happened. And it's procurement, and it's the fact that people know that the private sector can move fast. And this is the kind of thing that's not discussed. Another thing that's not discussed is the question of financing. And the community land trust idea, which you'll end up with, it gets over the financing issue. So we can build more with private sector funding. Yeah,
you can go directly to a bank. You don't need to go through the state for.
Yes, well, you have to look at the Eurostat rules and the reason why there isn't public sector housing, and the reason is that our state is not allowed to borrow according to the rules essentially coming from Lisbon that we all signed up to, unfortunately. So they can spend annually, but they can't spend capital, which is why they're spending a fortune on HAP and RAP and all of those other things.
Yes.
And counterintuitively, we're not building. And there is a problem about on-balance sheet spending. Now,
but they are able to bypass that with calling it and officially declaring a housing emergency. They can bypass that.
They could do that, yes. With difficulty, and you need allies. Whereas they don't even have to do that if they did a community land trust, because they could put the land in I say put it in trust. Don't leave it public. It's not safe as public.
Because successive governments will reclaim it and take it as their own. Yeah.
Somebody will buy an election by giving it away. That's number one. If the ECB doesn't actually insist that we sell it, because we're going to look at another financial crisis 2 or 3 years down the road, and if they're not in a war room, looking at scenarios here, there is no excuse for this. The last time it just hit them in the face. No. This time there's no excuse. You've Brexit and you have a crisis that's happening. Italy could cause it at any moment.
Yes.
They have to think about this. And Greece was forced to sell its assets.
Yeah.
So you have to be... It is safer to actually put it in trust.
You've seen the stories, but the fires. I'm going to go a bit macro on Greece, and people don't talk about it, the cost of austerity. But when there were fires in Greece recently, the people who tried to flee came up against big walls because beaches that were in the public domain had been privatised and essentially sold off, and people got trapped behind walls and died. And austerity killed those people.
They did.
That is when. It doesn't get said enough. The human cost of austerity was something we don't really talk about here, and yet we have this, as you said, we have these threats. Okay, we can go very big and talk climate change, we can go directly to next April and talk Brexit, and we can also talk about the fact that Italy, for the second or third time, is teetering on the brink, and we know that we have someone in Washington who likes trade wars, and we're a very small, open economy.
Yes, and we have an overvalued stock exchange in America. It's topping. It's going to top, and it'll take a while, but there will be knock-on effects.
Well, the quantitative easing
they have to rail back on
exactly.
It. They can't continue.
They can't continue, yes. And when you start to take the patient off the methadone,
they'll do it in the ECB as well, and we'll be in trouble. And the government knows this, but they're not being honest with us. We're not getting honest discussions on this. But there's two ways out. The Community Land Trust is one way. Another way that should be discussed, but it's another subject, is a public investment bank. Yeah. Because you can use the money you have, your public money, and wash it through a bank and get 10 times the value. The problem is, our government wants to flog AIB and Bank of Ireland and keep the price up. So are they going to introduce
AIB is the best bank to do it with right now, because we still have control of it. A large majority of our citizens, so if you say there's 4.8 million, you can rest assured that over 1 million people bank with them. So immediately you have this,
owning shares in a private bank, or owning all the shares, is not the same as a public bank.
No.
You'll have to fire them all of the bankers.
No, that should have been done in 2008.
Yes.
Can I have that job, please?
Yeah, you have to bring in a new set. No, I'm very much supporting the local public banking model, the Sparkasse model, and they're willing to help us. And of course, in Germany, they have an investment bank, and we actually are using their money in here in our, I forget what it's called, not a proper bank, the investment vehicle, whatever it's called. It's actually a German public investment bank, but we're not creating our own money. So the German taxpayer is getting the benefit of that. So there are two things we can do, and could be done in the morning, but we have to accept that maximising the value of the banks is not our priority. And then things become possible, even without declaring an emergency, going to Europe and trying to persuade these guys that we need this. After all, you've got to bear in mind, the Irish government has been telling them that we're the fastest growing economy in Europe. The best boy in class. It's very hard to come at them again and say, we have an emergency, guys, we need the rules.
Well, I don't know. I think historically, when you look historically and how land fits in, not just in Ireland, but Europe-wide. I mean, a little over 120 years ago, we had a wave of revolutions.
We did.
All basically caused by land ownership. It was basically land
but it was a
ownership.
truncated revolution. It got shared once, then the door was closed.
Yeah, with the counter-revolution straight away.
Well,
yes.
it didn't. But we have to finish that revolution, the one that David started, and we have to take land back into common ownership. Now, that does not mean the nationalisation of land. That means there's two ways. We start with community land trusts, particularly for housing, but also for other uses on that land. And that makes housing to buy immediately affordable, because you can buy the building, it's about 2/3 of the cost, within the prudential rules the central bank has set. And you pay a ground rent, but the ground rent and your mortgage will not be more than 30% of your income.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is actual affordable housing, folks. Not,
it's affordable.
Not this nonsense of the States.
You can do affordable housing. There should be no unaffordable housing. The fact that we're using the term affordable housing.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, yes.
And people are scared to buy too, because, it is beginning to fall. The top end of the Irish market is beginning to fall.
The market has grown. The mortgage market has grown at the slowest rate since it turned the corner, which is the first sign of.
Well, I live in an area where it was a temperature gauge the last time around. And I was only yesterday, I was driving out and I saw 5 for sale signs 3 inches apart from each other.
Okay.
And I said, first time I've seen it. No. First time I've seen it, that you're beginning to get a bank of houses for sale.
Yeah.
Whereas previously it was one for sale sign.
And it's the prudential rules really, because the rents are going up, and the prudential rules were correct.
Yes.
It's only one measure. The other should have been a land tax, or a site value tax. We didn't get that, but nevertheless, we can make it affordable now for people to buy within the prudential rules, and that would mean that the banks will lend, and we need them to lend because they have to be recapitalised.
But the problem what they're looking at the moment is they're saying, look, let's relax the prudential rules. Because that's what
mistake.
Of course, it would be a huge mistake. But you're already hearing it's been discussed, and you're paying more in rent than you would in your mortgage? Shouldn't the bank lend you more money?
Yes, exactly.
And you're going, Jesus Christ!
That's what God is.
This is why the build to rent people are salivating at coming into Ireland and doing a deal whereby they will get the land for free. So part of their rentals will be made available, so-called affordable. And I'm pretty certain that's the deal. But it'll revert after 15, 20 years or whatever. That's the deal. They'll have given away our public land for a short-term deal that doesn't even deliver, permanent security for people. But we can do it. Like the St. Michael Estate site could have been delivered, and we were hoping that we'd have an opportunity to bid for this, at 50% affordable to buy, genuinely affordable to buy, you're just not getting the land. And I think it was 30% affordable to rent. No, it might have been 30% social and 20% affordable to rent. All of that can be delivered, and the affordable to rent could have been our own pension funds. All of that could be done, cost rental. But you're giving a choice to people, and you're using less of your public sector funding. Your precious on balance sheet goes straight into social, and it's there. And there's no need to use it on affordable to rent, and there's no need to use it on affordable to buy. And all we would need is a way of paying back the local authority for the land over time. Now, I have to take it's very secure. The more secure an investment is, the lower the return can be. That's how it goes. I'm a valuer, a development and planning valuer, as well as an architect. And the only person, I think, in this country who's combined both those insights. And I can tell you architecture is a lot harder than evaluation surveying. But that's the hardest thing to understand, that something that's giving you a lower return can actually give you a higher capital value. But that's essentially it. So if the local authority will accept being paid back over time, according as incomes rise, because incomes will rise. We can't have incomes, stagnating for a further 40 years. Not going to happen. There'll be revolution. Incomes that are going to go up. So you will be able to pay more, and then we will have funds to expand. And one reason I always argue for the productive professionals to be represented in a land trust is and the community. You can't make it too cozy for the community that's just got this deal. The garden cities were land trusts, and they, within one generation, the people who had the long leaseholds, the residential people, had gotten the freehold. They used their political might. And oddly enough, my daughter has just bought a house in Letchworth Garden City. Okay. She had to pay through the nose for it, unfortunately. But it's a great place to live because they still have the commercial premises on long leases. So they have funds that circulate to provide all kinds of things like community gardens and libraries and all sorts of things. It's really amazing, even though it's lost its affordability. And that's one reason too, the land trust should be able to have commercial and other properties, not just housing, because it can charge the open market rate for the ground rent of the commercial properties. Units. And that can be used to provide the services we need. And we have not discussed yet sustainability on the construction. Nobody's talking about it. Are we going to hit the standards we need considering the climate challenge we have in front of us? How are we going to do it? And we do need a trust who has a long-term view there. You also need an entity that will own, for instance, if you want to do solar voltaics, you can't have it all broken up. At a certain level, you need a common ownership of the rights of ways of using the roofs or of the walls or whatever. And the land trust can provide that. So we can get common ownership of your energy assets. You could do the same for waste as well, and waste can be turned into energy, waste can be turned into nutrients, and your water. You can do things once you have an entity with a long-term view that owns the land.
Actually, I spoke to Mick Byrne from UCD, and he spoke about being in one of these developments whereby they were one of the mixed tenures and social housing, affordable housing in Sweden, I think it was. And he said it was one of their water harvesting thing. They did a communal laundrette. And he said, but there was also ways, so the water would start up, and there was a community fish pond.
Yes.
And he said, and they ran
That's a water store.
Yeah, and it was a water store, exactly. Yeah. And they did all of this, and it was like he said, oh yeah, everything in that parameters, all recycled, all taken, and all from within their own usage.
Yes. You see, we're all talking about the bare necessity for shelter, and yet the opportunity is so much greater. You could have really wonderful places to live. You can have elder care and childcare right there. You can have community gardens. You can have your own energy. And you can do your workplaces as well. Why are we saying only housing here? And you're setting up scenarios where you can only do housing. So you need an entity that can do more than housing. There is no need to build directly. You have housing associations and cooperatives there. And in fact, you should break it up into much smaller entities so you can bring in builders.
Welcome to the Orla Hegarty.
That's the Orla Hegarty's,
solidly on that one.
The Dunkirk flotilla.
Not talking about how to do it in terms of, this is my valuation surveying.
Yeah.
You need somebody to handle it. You can get the benefits of scale through cooperation.
Yes.
You don't have to have one single deep-pocketed entity. In fact, it's much safer to break it up, as we're learning now with the PPPs that are failing.
Exactly.
You can't shift risk. You can only manage it. And managing risk means cutting it into little pieces so that you're diversified. And it brings more builder-developer. There's nothing wrong with the builder-developer in the sense of somebody who is actually building. The reason why our building is really Victorian, it hasn't really progressed in the same way as any other part of our life, is that the profit is made from the increase in land value. And the construction and design is a cost.
Yes.
So there's no innovation put into construction and design. If you take out entirely the speculative element of land and planning, you can only make profit on your construction and design.
And all of a sudden,
it gets interesting.
That's actually competition.
Yeah, that's competition. Now, we are going to need offsite. You don't have to have one entity that owns the offsite construction company that is also the developer building 3,000 apartments for this to work. You do need an open system in your offsite so that any architect and any builder, we have to get down to modules again, like the Georgian Dublin was built on a modular system. It was the brick, was a modular size, and the windows, which are beautifully designed in terms of the environment, were all modular. And many people were producing the same modular elements, and everybody knew how to construct, so there was an awful lot less failures. So what we need is a new vernacular.
What is
more
it?
Offsite construction, lighter weight, but again partly modular, and you get huge variety.
We are doing that. There's a new development just down the road where Smurfit's used to be, and I believe the majority of that is offsite, and the fit out of it then is less than 4 months on delivery.
It could be,
and these are luxury 4-bedroom homes.
People have tried doing offset in Britain and didn't succeed because they were trying to vertically integrate the whole thing. That is a mistake, as I say. We really have to work. We used to have on Ferris Furbaha when I was in college, and after a while, I think Rory Quinn got rid of it. And it was a government organisation that researched construction and other elements. We thought it was deadly boring as students going on about modular this, modular that. But we need a forest verba. We need people saying, listen guys, open systems is where it's at in the computer world, in IT, and distributed systems and distributed knowledge. So we have to come back to that. And so that's the only way we're going to get over our building issues, because we have a huge increase in the performance of the buildings, which is a good thing. But we haven't caught up with that. The industry hasn't caught up with those new standards. And some of those new standards, these are the building regulations, are actually at odds with each other. And we have a certification system, you will have heard Mel Reynolds talk about, that nearly tore the RII apart on this issue. And it is a messy system. And one way I think we resolve that is if we had a community land trust or a cooperative doing the cooperative side.
So you're in favour of these land trusts, right?
Yeah. But I'm in favour actually of cooperatives too, to get over the procurement issue.
Yeah.
And the managing the works and assigned certifier and assigned design certifier. All of those things. Very boring subject, but this is how you make sure your buildings don't turn into fire traps and will stay up and will perform to the level that we require, which is nearly passive. It's actually a very high standard to reach. And we can cooperate to do that. We're not going to compete to do that. And regulation isn't doing that. So give cooperation a chance. Now, one thing about this land agency is it's more like an enabling agency. It all depends what will happen. We haven't seen the legislation. It could give an opportunity to a community land cooperative stroke trust on one site, at least, to experiment. And see how fast we can get up and running.
We call it a sandbox and let them play and see what happens.
Yes, and there was discussion of that in the NESC report. It said try different things.
Basically the NESC report, what they did was read it and then say, well, that's all very nice, but this is actually what we want.
It's what we want.
And we don't know, we can't, again, we don't know specifically because it's only up and running, but I know I've had, I wouldn't say a conversation, I've had a disagreement with Ed Brophy who was talking about it, and then I saw Orla weighed in, and there's definitely a lot that we don't know yet, but what we do see, it doesn't seem to be what the NESC report really recommended.
It looks like they're going for standard PPPs, really, where they're looking for a large, deep-pocketed investor, and they will swap the land for basically some social goodies.
And we see across the globe that people are turned away from that model, and yet we're
I know, but this is because of the Lisbon rules and various other things.
I understand that, but we have got. Okay, so you mentioned HAP. HAP is going to be 1.22 billion
oddly enough, you see, there's no constraint on your
on your day-to-day spending.
This is the weird thing.
Yeah.
So it's the capital spending, and anything you're borrowing for that is the problem.
But you've got to, people have, Fine Gael are always touted to us as fiscally responsible. And always touted, and they tout themselves as fiscally responsible.
The phrase they use is Fianna Fáil ruined the country and we saved it. Isn't that one of their
to spend that much on HAP. To spend that much on HAP when the economically clever thing to do is to build.
Yes, it is. But nobody has any building expertise. All of the actual
expertise is in
actual building and design and engineering. They're not talking to the government. They have the financialized people talking to them. They have the Urban Land Institute, which is an international institute that started in America, that is promoting the idea of investment, large-scale investment, particularly in build-to-rent. They've been at that for years. It cost me $500 a year to go to hear what the government ministers are hearing all of the time. So the deal is we're going to do build-to-rent, and they will pull in international finance for that, and they will get some relief on affordability for a time. But what they will promise is, and the more there's a crisis, the more likely will happen. And that's how, the shock doctrine happens.
Yes,
even the march, unfortunately, is going to bring build to rent, 100% build to rent on public land nearer. The more the crisis is, the more people yell. It's far more likely to happen.
Well, they're obviously more comfortable with the idea of build to rent than they are with the idea of cooperative housing, for example. They're certainly, because when you see the Minister for Housing, you know, as a defender of build to rent, you understand where there is an insight to say, look, it's when Elon Musk started talking about universal basic income, we all should get worried, you know?
Yeah, well, I'm in favour of that, but my point is, it should be paid out of the land rents, essentially, and all the charges for the use of the commons, because you are not, that's the only way. If we start with the Community Land Trust, stroke cooperative, get moving on public land, we can over time introduce a site value tax, starting with commercial land. And what we do is, we say we get rid of rates and we bring in a site value tax that is paid by the landowner. So it's off the tenant. Now, the landlord will get it back in the next review, but only to market. So this really helps people who are caught with upward only leases. You also say that zoned land and building sites is commercial and pays a site value tax. You've gotten over any of your constraints then.
Well, it is actually commercial when they're able to use it.
It's a commercial business.
Completely.
Then I would move to, this is the nice thing, then I would move to saying rental property beyond, you can threshold it beyond 1 or 2 or whatever if you like. Rental property is a commercial activity and must pay site value tax. And we get those QUIFs or whatever they are, QUI, I don't know how to pronounce it. And all those guys who've got the deal, they're not paying any tax. This is the thing. These build-to-rents are not going to pay any tax under the way that they're structured, because you can't tax finance and money that moves, but you can get them on what is called a local benefit levy, really, it was described. It's for using the land there, and all the benefits that accrue from the land, it's a charge. It cannot be avoided. That's what they should do.
Okay, that's certainly an eye-opener.
Yeah, and then gradually you bring it in for all property, for residential, but you'd give people a big, fat, free quota, because you co-own the land. That would certainly allow you to own a modest house without paying much, if anything.
You've said that the property tax, the way it's currently structured, is more like a homeowner's poll tax. It
is, yeah. And we knew that they'll never put it up again, unfortunately. And this is what they're talking about.
They already had it in reducing the rate, so they don't have to
Actually, it's a tax on young people. I mean, it's so not fair on young people. I cannot believe the left in this country oppose property taxes, unbelievably so. Now, okay, property tax is partly a bad tax, partly a good tax. The part that's on the land is good. The part that's on the building is bad, because what you want is construction, and you want people to improve their dwellings. But one thing you could do is, for instance, if you had a land trust, you could, people who are struggling, older people, you could offer to buy the land from under their house. Right? That will devalue their house, give them a lump of money, and they would have to pay a grand rent on it afterwards. But it's devalued the house, so children could inherit without paying at the moment.
Anything above.
Huge sums of money, that means they have to sell the house. That's number one. And they could, and another one is with the, the guys who bought the loans off the banks.
Yeah.
It might be, and a lot of people are underwater and can never pay the mortgage. But if you had a land trust, you could buy the land from them, and then what's left, maybe they could get a normal mortgage, but they have to pay the grand rent going forward. But that again is based, I would say, but you need a good portfolio to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So gradually over time, you could bring people into the land trust model, and then when people understand how it benefits people, and when they can trust the government a little bit more, because there is an issue of paying a lot of money to the government, and what are they going to use it for? Probably to pay off our debts, which are we weren't due. It was a debt we were forced to take on.
So when we started the crisis, what was the national debt?
It was 23%.
It was. I think
we were running a surplus.
But now we're at 203 billion, and
it is one of the most indebted. This is why we're very vulnerable.
Third most indebted country in the world.
Yes.
Personal.
And if the interest rates go up, the
this
ECB,
country.
and they will do, because institutional money is flying over to America.
Yeah. Because rates have started to tick up. Yeah.
They've ticked up. That is a huge threat. And I hope our government, as I say, are war-gaming this. And one thing you have to do is get your assets off balance sheet safely.
Do you know what?
And another thing that's happening is, and this is where I've come up against my old environmentalist friends, our wind energy's been given away free.
Yes.
And our solar energy's been given away free.
With no community buy-in.
And well, I tell you another thing, our forestry, they've changed the rules very recently to attract foreign investment into forestry because we're not meeting targets. So it used to be that the premia you'd get to plant forestry would only be half if you weren't a farmer. If you weren't an active farmer, you'd only get half the amount. And it was capped at 60,000 a year, which is a lot of money. Now you don't have to be a farmer. It is not capped. So you get the premia tax-free. Any sales of wood from that forestry is tax-free. Any passing it on capital gains and you sell the land is tax-free. No capital acquisition tax. Okay. And they are using their leveraging funds with European Investment Bank funding and our pension funds. And that money is now going out effectively to buy up the ordinary beef farmer in Ireland. And it's not discussed. And I don't hear the Green Party saying this is absentee landlordism again. That money is going to go out of the country if it's not Irish. If it doesn't circulate. And why isn't it capped exactly? And what I hear, you have to have 2 million to invest, by the way, to be considered. No discussion about this. So our assets are being quietly made available. Yeah. Yes, this thing about, Ireland being the best little country to do business is true, but you have to be an international financial elite to benefit.
Oh, yes.
Essentially. That's the big story that's going on. And that's where us commoners have to revolt and say, no more, guys, we're taking back our commons.
And to come back to where we came in, and you said in the past that private land was permitted.
It was.
Private land wasn't an inalienable right.
Yes.
It wasn't an inalienable right, and it has never
been. It came
been.
with rights and also responsibilities.
Yes. And in the history, particularly of Ireland, these people who think that I own this property and I can own this property in perpetuity, you're wrong. It has never operated that way. It has never, ever operated that way. And if you don't take the time now, and it is a here and now type of thing, if you don't take the time now to accommodate the majority of people, sooner or later you lose your right of ownership to that land simply by being too greedy. Simply by being too greedy.
Yes. Just to wrap this up, I think there's two great points, and we can I think the hope listeners are going to get as much out of this as we have, because I'm getting great information.
Yeah, new tangents, new ways to think.
But what's important is this is also a grounds to tackle inequality.
It is,
and that is important that we stress that, because we're not talking about because what we're facing into, if we go macro again, back to the threats of climate change and all, we're talking about a reduction in living standards globally, and we need to tackle, because that's potentially where we're going. If oil.
No, we're looking at slavery. You're not using strong enough language.
Okay, I wasn't going to be as I wasn't going to be.
It's a new feudalism. This is a new feudalism. We're looking at that, and what they're going to say in the end of the day is, they will say, if you want to tackle climate change, you have to agree to these conditions. Effectively, you're going to be slaves in your own land, and because your saviors, the barons, have to be paid off. That's ultimately what's going to happen. And in housing and so on. That's the big issue. So we have to stand up against that, and we have to have a narrative and a story that's simple and strong enough.
Yeah, I think
we have to come together on this issue. Just on the issue of community land trusts, I was just thinking when I was driving here, the 3 F's this time. It provides affordability in perpetuity. It's always affordable. It's fair because it's for instance, if you were to do a Colin and you're giving the land free to those who are buying, that's not fair for the people who just didn't make the cut that time, because there's only so much public land. So, and also, you can sell as well local authority housing under the same basis. They get the house, but not the land, because it is a very good way of distributing wealth and has really helped a lot of families over the years. So I'm not against it. And F is finance. It would be easier to finance if we separate the building from the land.
Yeah. No, I want to see the end. There's another F. I want to see the end of the financialization of this. And what I mean by that is what we talk about all the time, that these large funds looking at this and saying, here's how we can extract the most profit from this, and actually coming up with SPVs or whatever way they want to do it.
Pay no tax.
And ultimately paying no tax, and ultimately we get to then say, and we do, sadly, keep saying, oh, aren't we the fastest growing economy in the EU again? And it's only when we look at the real figures and we understand what we're doing to ourselves in terms of inequality rates, in terms of income inequality, in terms of, as you say, now normalising the fact that you'll never get on the property ladder.
You'll never own. You'll never have the security of ownership. What happens when you're 65?
In a tiny country, of 4.8 million people with lots of resources,
with the lowest land, with some of the lowest land density usage in the world.
Unfortunately, think of that as a prize for the international global elite. Would you be quiet about that now?
But it is
the least threatened by climate change. You know, we've been invaded before. The obvious one is our Brexit is a huge threat as well. Just looking at us.
But this time it's not an invasion. This time they're invited in to do this. They're invited in, and we are told vultures are good. And we're told this, and it's
vultures have a road.
Oh my God, it's so crazy. It's so crazy.
It's amazing. Yeah, it is amazing that somehow or another, I mean, okay, Trump goes on about the press, but it's amazing how little really important discussion that is happening in our media.
We've had that, we had that conversation in here, and
there are some really good journalists. Ian Keogh's written brilliantly on vulture funds and what's going on, but it's the problem is I can go straight to Ian Keogh because I know he's the exception sometimes, you know, and not the rule. And too often we hear the Leinster House bubble recited back to us. Emer, I think we're going to leave it there, but I am absolutely delighted that you came in. Martin got all excited when you start talking revolution. I haven't seen the rocking chair move as quickly in years.
No, thank you so much for coming in.
Well, thank you.
And it is a third strain to where we are at the moment, the private-public.
Yes, there is another option. There is another option, and an exciting one, more radical in some ways, and in other ways, oddly enough, borrowing from the right and from the left. We have to make our ask bigger.
Yeah.
And again, give people an idea to get behind that's different to the current hegemony.
Yes.
All right, guys, thanks for listening. We are live on Friday in the Sound House on Eden Quay. I'm not sure if there's any tickets left, and it's a bit strange to be saying that, but the last time I checked on Ticketmaster, it appeared to be sold out, but I'm thinking it's just a glitch in the system. No one would pay to come and see myself. And
Tony bought all the tickets. Honest to God, Tony bought all the tickets.
Talk to you all soon, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.